I want to ask you guys as well, which is, I just want to go back to the public markets for a second. I tweeted out some of these amazing things I learned from the Bezos.
Oh my God, this is demented.
Did you guys see what I tweeted?
I saw your tweet and I've been reading it. It's unbelievable.
Do you have it in front of you, Jason?
I do. I'll just give you the Chamath's tweet here, high level. 28% of purchases on Amazon are completed in less than 3 minutes. I think we've all done that. 50% of purchases on Amazon are completed in less than 15. And if you actually look at that, and I think this is I don't know if you made this calculation.
No, this is Bezos wrote it in the letter. All of these things are.
So if you value your time at $10 an hour, a very low one, that's $750 a year. And that means your Prime is free of $120 a year. Still leaves you with $630 in profit.
Let me say it differently. The average trip to the store, driving, buying, coming back is an hour. So what Bezos said is that typically, we will save you 75 hours because we can make all of that more efficient for you. At $10 an hour, that's worth $750. Right. We only charge you $120 for Prime, which means you get $630 of savings. But then he goes on to say, and we have 200 million customers on Prime, so we're saving them $126 billion. My instant reaction was two things. And so the last 2 points in that tweet are mine. One is, holy fuck, that's more in 1 year than what most companies are worth in their entire lifetime. And the second is that you can buy Amazon for 13 times 1 year's worth of savings for a customer. If you look at Prime.
Yeah.
Which makes Amazon seem exceptionally cheap. But the reason I brought up Amazon is he also wrote in there about his responsibility to his employees. And we were just talking about employees and churn. And this was incredible to me that 70% of their employees voted down the unionization effort in Alabama. And I just wanted to get Saxy Poo.
Yeah.
Red pill it, crush it, snort it. What do you got to say?
Yeah.
Well, I mean, what happened is you had in Alabama, there's a Amazon plant there that where there basically was an election to decide whether they would go union or not. And there were 2,536 workers who voted in this union election. About 1,800 voted against unionization versus 738 who voted to unionize. And then ballots from another 505 workers were challenged by either Amazon or the union. So we don't know yet what they mean, but those votes won't change the outcome so the election is over. Now, this was a heavily lobbied election. I mean, Amazon was lobbying employees, but so were the unions. And it looks like the unions at the end of the day lost and the employees voted to, remain unionless.
Brad, what do you think?
I thought it was a beautiful defense of capitalism that's very much needed right now.
Yeah.
It reminded me a lot, frankly, of the Gates Foundation annual letter, where Bill Gates is saying, capitalism is far from perfect, but it's resulted in the most important era of prosperity and health and wellness in the history of the planet. And, as I said on CNBC this week, we live at a moment where capitalism is absolutely under attack. And I truly believe it's the greatest potential force for good in the world. It brought us a vaccine, right? It brings us innovation that pulls people out of poverty, that makes people healthier, that gives an opportunity for people in rural areas that are impoverished to be educated. But I do think it's incumbent upon Bezos. I think this was very much a robber baron sort of defense of building railroads. And I thought it was brilliant in its execution. But I think it's important for all of us to stand up, not defensively, but to say, what are our obligations to make capitalism the greatest force for good? Chamath, whether it's you and I talking about Invest America on CNBC and giving every child in this country a participation in the ownership society. Right. Or all the other initiatives that we need to work on to make the case. We need to make it better.
And I think one of the issues here is, what we see on Twitter, being part of the Twitterati, is, people who are super woke, socialist, whatever, talking about this. But in reality, the workers don't want it. And I was talking to somebody in the media space.
No, hold on. Can I just say something slightly different, Jason? I think what workers don't want is the version 1.0 of unions.
Okay.
Because I think what they see that as is a tax that then goes and fills the coffers of certain people. I think you've seen like, a bunch of waste, a bunch of graft, a bunch of corruption. Yeah. People have been arrested. Unions are not effective anymore in collective bargaining. They are not. They don't have any data. They don't have any facts. They don't
have any power.
But they're not set up to win. So I think, in my opinion, I think unions have an important role, but you need a version 2.0. You need some young, smart, bright people to reframe what unions are. And then I think you would see everybody collectively organized, which is, it's not about dues. You don't need hundreds of millions of dollars to all of a sudden like use to then elect certain people. And that old model is breaking. It's breaking every day. Instead, I think what people need to do is like, if you come together and like you understand what are the products we make, what are the margins we have, how is my contribution measured, and then you're able to use data and fact to really collectively bargain. That hasn't happened yet. So I think what
it could be a free market, and people could go work at Starbucks or for Postmates.
Both are good.
And get paid more.
But capitalism allows both to exist.
Yeah, if you think about what a union is, you could almost make an argument that it is the ultimate manifestation of a free market system, because it is basically like a bunch of people spinning out to have their own startup. And so, that group of people are saying, we're not charging enough for our product or service today. The value that we are creating is worth more. Therefore, we should go create a different business and charge more and effectively compete in the marketplace with a higher quality product at a higher price point. And I think that may be kind of, the distinction between what people kind of view to be regulatory capture around unions, where there has been government involvement in the past, versus what may be possible. I think I've heard some people talk about how, at some point in the world, we end up with, at some point in the evolution of capitalism, you end up in a place where there are no employees. There's just a ton of independent contractors doing independent work. And maybe there is an organization of people around doing the same work over and over together as a group, where you charge one kind of, aggregated fixed rate for that service.
The other thing to me was like, all of a sudden it brought into such a stark contrast. This wasn't like 55-45. This was 70-30, and probably it could have been 80-20 or 90-10. And so it said to me, wait a minute, there's a very small vocal group of people who are screaming from the mountaintops about this level of unionization and organization. And then the people that are actually the participants of that system are like, no, thank you.
Yeah. Well, I mean, it shows that Amazon does a great job managing, right? I mean, they create enough value and they've bid enough for the service that people don't feel like they're being underbid.
Media companies have been going through a unionization process, from Gawker to Vox. The New York Times has already had one, and you're starting to see a bunch of folks voting on that. I was speaking to somebody who runs one of these companies, and they said in the short term, it's fabulous because they set the prices of employees. So when somebody comes to you and says, I want a raise, they say, well, we can't, because here's the pay scale that you negotiated. So we have to stick to that. And I can't give you more than other people, because one of the things you fought for as a union was pay parity. And so you've got 5 years. Here's what it says on the chart, 5 years. So it made everything predictable. And they said they like that. They said the problem is, over the long term, when you get to year 10 of a union, in order to fire somebody who's not doing a great job, you have negotiated with the union that they have to get all these warnings, and it's uncomfortable. So then the managers don't do the performance plans. They don't do that. And then eventually, who's left in the organization? The lower performers. And then who leaves? The higher performers who can command more money. So once you get this union thing going inside of a media company, in the short term, it controls costs. In the long term, it kills excellence. This was what somebody told me.
Have you guys seen the movie American Factory? I think this was on Netflix. It was actually created by, it was the first film produced by Barack and Michelle Obama's production company. But it's a very interesting film about, there's a Chinese billionaire who goes to kind of the Rust Belt, to a little city outside Dayton, Ohio. And basically opens a factory producing glass windshields for cars. And this factory had been shut down. The whole town was kind of out of work. They were kind of down in the dumps. And so this crazy Chinese billionaire comes in there and reopens the factory. And and it creates like 2,000 jobs for people in this town. And everything starts off great. There's these really interesting sort of culture clashes between the American workers and the Chinese executives. And some of it's kind of comical, and they showed it in the movie. But then about halfway through the movie, and by the way, like, these are people who are out of work, and, this Chinese company comes in and they do things kind of their way, but they pay people pretty well and creating a lot of jobs. And initially everybody's very happy with it, and the politicians are all encouraging it. And then about halfway through the movie, the unions come in. And the unions start agitating, and they start telling all the workers that you're underpaid, you're mistreated. They start, there's sort of intimidation tactics being used. And then the politicians come in, and, these politicians are sort of, this is Ohio, right? And so the politicians start telling the workers at this plant that they should get unionized. And it turns into this giant battle because, and the Chinese company basically threatens to leave because they came into this town and made something like a $500 million investment in this plant based on an understanding of a certain cost structure. And now all of a sudden the union wants to change that. And, it turns into this giant conflict. And you realize that, look, the workers in this town had a good deal. And then the unions are about to blow the whole thing and wreck it. And they're about to drive this Chinese company out of the town. And then they do this election, kind of like what Amazon did. And ultimately the Chinese company wins, and the voters choose not to go with the union. But you just feel like it's just so frustrating to see this. Because it's not like this particular union is benefiting the workers. It's about benefiting these union representatives.
Who are then paying off the politicians, which gets back to our discussion in your little speech for your governorial run that you're going to fire all the teachers come September 1st if they don't show up for work.
No, but look, it's a really interesting movie because I think what it does is it highlights that what's in the interest of these labor union leaders is not necessarily what's in the interest of the employees.
Anybody watch?
No. This is like the simplest form of incentives to understand. You pay dues as a union member. Those revenues get allocated and controlled by a handful of people in union leadership. So this shouldn't be a surprise that their incentives get misaligned, especially when you go from a small, effective union to a broad, union that represents all kinds of different workers. It's an impossible infrastructure to manage, and it becomes unwieldy. Unions can be effective. There is a value and a place for them. They need to get reinvented.
By the way, I looked this up. You know what the average wage, the average fee is to be in a union across all unions in the United States as a percent of labor? Anyone got a guess? It's 1.5%. Yeah,
I said 2.
Yeah. So the argument is if they can increase wages net to those employees by more than 1.5%, it pays for itself. Right. That's the argument.
Think about their incentive.
I totally get it.
They're a startup in and of themselves.
They are an asset manager, right? Their goal is to grow assets.
Manager.
Yeah,
their goal is to grow assets.
So the more assets they grow, the bigger their business.
The way in which, relating this back to Bezos's annual letter, right? We've been presented this false choice for 2 decades between some form of Ayn Randian capitalism and a nanny state.
Right.
The either everything's unionized or we have no intervention at all. Yeah. What I love about this moment in time, what I love about the leadership of Benioff or Bezos or Gates or even Anthony Tan, this incredible mission, values-driven leader who's using the power of capitalism to uplift tens of millions of people in Southeast Asia, is that I see a totally new generation of leaders that understand the responsibility, like they're charting the middle way, right? And we can equally reject Lorena Gonzalez, right? And at the same time, want to have $15 minimum wage in the state of California. Like those two things are mutually compatible. And so that's why Sachs has to run. He's got to chart the third way.
Let me ask you this, Brad. Would you put up $250K for an exploratory fund, Brad?
Sachs, do you believe in a $15 minimum wage?
Oh,
I'd be fine with it. It's not that's
Oh, it's on.
He took a blue pill.
Give everyone everything.
I think certainly in the state of California, I think that makes sense. I think, look, there might be some parts of the country where the standard of living is much cheaper. I mean, I think probably the minimum wage should be a state issue because there's such a disparity in different cost of living in different states. So I'm not sure I'd federalize it, but certainly in California, I think $15 makes sense.
What about $20, David?
Yeah, David.
$20 in California.
Why not 1,000?
Yeah.
I love that.
David.
1,000.
Winner.
I love that.
Can everyone get a free Tesla?
No, but look, can we make the point about unions in California? I think there's a huge difference between private sector unions and public sector unions. So, look, I'm not against collective bargaining when it comes to these private sector unions, okay? Because the workers do have, these plants can involve very tough working conditions. It's physically dangerous. Before there were labor reforms, they were working really long, insane hours or safety issues. Okay. I think it makes sense to have some sort of collective bargaining, and there's somebody to negotiate with. There's the management of the company has an incentive. And so you have some give and take, and you have a negotiation. It produces an outcome. Public sector unions are completely different, right? Because when the teachers union goes to negotiate, who are they negotiating with? They're negotiating with Gavin Newsom, and the teachers union is his biggest contributor. So who has an incentive to oppose their demands?
There's no market.
There's no market. And so it, at a minimum, takes a politician who has a lot of integrity to stand up to the teachers unions, because
Bloomberg. He did it in New York.
Yeah, Bloomberg did do it.
By the way, this is a true market dynamic for everything as it relates to government spending. If you think about when the government says it's going to spend something on something, legislation passes and it mandates that something needs to be bought. When that happens, there is no negotiating power because there is no marketplace to achieve that objective. They have to spend the money on the thing that they said they were going to spend it on. And at that point, there is a seller who sells that thing who says, oh shit, these guys have to buy it. I'll double the price. Okay, great. That's just the natural law of government inflation that happens. It's happened with everything that we've seen inflate in this country, education, healthcare, is all because it's a government mandated service. And so then the service providers to the government have a single captive customer who has to spend the money. And so the same is true of education. The government has to educate. Therefore, I can show up as an education union and say, I'm going to double my price to educate your people because you have to do it by law. And you've passed all these laws that say you have to do it. And there is nothing the government can do about it. And so, I think it is worth highlighting that the lack of a marketplace, meaning if you were to negotiate with a company, let's say a company had to buy productivity software for its employees, it could decide whether or not buying that productivity software generated a positive return at the price point that the sellers are negotiating against them. And they could say, no, you know what? I'm not going to buy it. Everything's too expensive. I'm going to go find another way. The problem is governments are mandated to spend that money on that particular service. And therefore, there is no room. And so unions are a manifestation of this fundamental problem with giving governments large budgets and relying on the government to provide the service to us outside of a market-driven context. So I think the question really is, can healthcare, can education, can these things that have been inflated with the government having such an active role be provided in a way that the government facilitates their provisioning without the government being the customer?